Hello and welcome back. In this video, I'll show you a demo on how to create a persistent storage volume and then assign the persistent storage volume to a MySQL Docker container. First, let's check if there are any Docker volumes available. Okay, good. There are no volumes. So let's go ahead and create a persistent storage volume in the host machine. This is the host machine. So let's go and create a persistent storage volume. So the command is, and let's give a name for the volume. And the volume has been created, it's local. So let's try to mount this volume inside a MySQL Docker container, because MySQL is a stateful application which writes some data into the database. So let's copy paste this command. This is nothing but the typical Docker run command to create a container. I have given the name to the MySQL container as Ganesh MySQL. You could give some name. And then the -v option actually maps the volume to an internal directory in the Docker container. So the MySQL data volume in the host machine is actually being mapped to the /var/lib/MySQL directory inside the Docker container. And this is the directory where MySQL will actually create its database and then store all its data. So we are going to actually map this to the volume. And then we are also going to set the environmental variable for the MySQL using the -e option and set the MySQL root password as my password. You could set it to anything. I'm just using my password as an example here. And then I'm going to run the MySQL Docker container as a daemon. And that's the name of the image. MySQL latest is the latest version of the MySQL image that will be downloaded from the Docker Hub public registry maintained by Docker. So let's copy paste this command to create the Docker container for MySQL and then make it use the volume that we created. All right. So the image is not locally found, so it will pull from the Docker Hub. Let's wait a few seconds for this to download and then it will run. Okay, perfect. So let's check if the container is running. MySQL container is running and it's running on port 3306. Right, so and the name of the container is Ganesh MySQL as we had requested. Let's log into the Docker container and check the directory that we mapped our storage volume to. So for that, the command is over here, Docker exec command. Let's execute the exec command as in an interactive mode. Right, so we are inside the Docker container now. The Docker exec -it, which is the interactive mode, and this is the container name. And once Docker connects to this container, it gives us the bash shell. And that's what we wanted Docker to do. So it gave us the bash shell. We are right now inside the MySQL Docker container and we have the access to the bash shell. We are logged in as root. This is the Docker container ID and this matches with this ID over here, right? So let's go to /var/lib/MySQL. See? MySQL has created all the files over here. These are the files created by MySQL. This directory is actually a storage volume that we created in the host machine. So that means we could actually access this data from the host machine. And even if this Docker container dies, the data will be retained in the host machine. So let's exit from here, go to the host machine, and then read the data from the host machine. So we exited from this Docker container. The Docker container will still continue to run because it's running as a daemon. See, it's still running. MySQL is still running. all we did was just exited from the bash shell of the Docker container. So let's check the data from the host machine. To do that, we need to first get the directory where our volume will be mounted in the host machine. So the command is docker volume inspect and then the volume name, right? So we wanted to inspect the volume, right? And the mount point in the host machine is /var lib docker. That's where Docker runs and stores all its files. And it has a volume directory and which it has this place where this volume is mounted. So let's go there. And that's what we have over here. So let's do a ls. So it says Ganigans, the user, regular user, does not have the permission to read this particular directory or list this particular directory. So what I'm going to do is execute this command again using root privileges, using the sudo command. Beautiful. This information or the files matches exactly with what we saw here, right? So this is from inside the container, Docker, MySQL Docker Container, and this output is from the host machine. So even if I kill this Docker container, for instance, let's say docker ps -a, let's get the Docker ID, and then I'll do Docker container stop f5 f5, right? So this will stop the Docker container, and then I will delete the container, docker rm, right? So the Docker container is gone completely. Let's do docker ps -a, which will show all containers, including the ones that are running, the ones that are stopped, paused, halted, everything. We don't have any container in our system. And let's do a ls of the storage volume directory, right? And see, the MySQL files still exist. They persist a Docker crash. Even though the MySQL Docker container is not running anymore, we still have access to the database and all the files that was created by the MySQL. Let's do one more thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a test file over here just to show you the concept. So as a root user, I'm going to corrupt this file system, but that's okay. I'm not going to modify any of the existing files. All I'm going to do is just going to create a temporary file. So I'm going to do, this will actually create a file. I'm going to give a file name. I'll call it as test file, right? So I created a test file. It says permission denied. Wow. So even as a root user, I don't have permission to modify this directory. Interesting. But anyway, so what the point I was trying to convey was, if I try to run one more instance of the Docker container, of the MySQL Docker container, so I'm going to create one more instance and make it use the same directory where we have already created these files, right? For instance, I can do an ls -l on the previous directory that will show you the date and the timestamp. Correct. So I'm going to do -l. So this shows all the timestamp when it was created, October 11th, so and so time. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run the Docker container again to show you that these files have not been modified at all. The Docker container will try to reuse, the MySQL Docker container will try to reuse the database that was created by the previous incarnation. Even though the previous incarnation crashed or died, you could just spawn up a new instance and it will start reusing the database. That's the beauty of Docker containers. So let's try to, so it created a new container with new ID, which is 3FA0, blah, blah, blah. Let's do docker ps -a. The container is running. Let's do ls -l. So I'm going to list the storage volume directory from the host machine. Beautiful, right? So it says the autoconf file was created October 11th at 11:57. All right, let's go check here. Beautiful, 1157. It still stays the same. It has not changed quite a bit. October 11th, 1157. This is when the MySQL command and the MySQL IBD file was created. See, it's same. It has not changed even a tiny bit. So that clearly shows that this volume is a persistent storage volume accessible from the host. It is created in the host machine and it was mounted within the Docker container into a particular directory, which is /var/lib/MySQL in this case. I hope you got an idea of how to create persistent storage volumes and then mount it inside a stateful application like MySQL, MongoDB, etc. There is another way of running the same MySQL application. So creating a storage volume and sharing it with the Docker container is one way. Another way is you can actually even share a folder between the host machine and the Docker container. Say for example, this is my current directory. I can create a directory named testdir, and then I can mount this directory inside a new container. So let's say I'll create one more MySQL instance, right? I will call it as a different name, control. I'll call it as a test MySQL. Okay, and then I will change the volume to a directory, which is a local directory. In this case, /home/gani/gans/testdir. So I'm going to map the test directory in host machine to the MySQL folder in the Docker container. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. Awesome. It created a new container whose ID is 9F9B. Let's check if the container is running. Yes, it is running. Okay. Now, let's check the local directory. Sudo ls. I hope I don't need a sudo, but anyway, I'll give the sudo. See, the MySQL Docker container started using this particular folder. So this is how you create a persistent storage volume in the host machine and then map it to a directory inside the Docker container.